Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, or as Jorge or George Nieves said of me yesterday on Twitter, the Sprinkler of Joy. I don't know what that means exactly, but you know what? I'll take it. I don't know if it's going to stick. That's up to you guys. Welcome to the 252nd episode of Robservations, the show about something. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. And let me tell you, as you all know, this show is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go buy any of their products at their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for what? Say it with me now. The Post-Geek Singularity community we have here today. Punch in PGS. You get 20% off your order, which is fantastic. You know, one of my favorite things to do on this show is when we do a topic or I talk about a topic and then there's a follow-up, like immediately, and you can talk about that. Now, normally, you know, it's about like Star Trek Picard or something to do with Star Wars or something. But yesterday I was talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and lo and behold, I wake up to find out that Sacha Baron Cohen, Borat himself, the fabulous Ali G, the man who is married to Isla Fisher, one of the currently great redheads working in cinema today, a man to be admired, a man who is a political provocateur. His show, of course, Looking into America, where he punked various politicians. Sacha Baron Cohen is a huge advocate for free speech. And I was not surprised that on Twitter, he had a few things to say about the old Zuck. And this was reported by Lee Moran today on the Huffington Post. And I'm just going to jump. Let's just get into it, as somebody once said every day on the internet, or whatever he says. I like him. Anyway, this is from their entertainment column in the Huffington Post. Sacha Baron Cohen nails the problem with Zuckerberg's freedom of expression defense. Now, for those of you who don't know, he spoke at Georgetown University rather eloquently. Although, you know, I always feel whenever I watch Mark Zuckerberg speak, I want to feel that it's not as rehearsed as it seems. I mean, I prefer somebody who speaks more extemporaneously, off the cuff, as it were, kind of like this show. Like, you know, I don't know. See, I guess I'm nervous today. I don't know why, and it's hot, and I just got out of the shower again. So anyway, what did Sacha Baron Cohen have to say about what Zuckerberg said? Well, according to this article that was published today, as I said in the Huffington Post, Sacha Baron Cohen used a metaphor involving a restaurant owner and neo-Nazis to tear into Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's claim that the social media platform Facebook champions freedom of expression. And he did, to be fair. You know, at his speech that he gave at Georgetown University, he did make a few points that when he first came up, what he wanted Facebook to do was give everybody a voice and bring people together. And I don't disbelieve that. We all know that Facebook was, of course, came out of Face Smash at Harvard University. Everybody should go back and watch The Social Network, whether it's 100% true or not. It's one of the most compulsively rewatchable movies I've ever seen. I never get enough of that film. But it doesn't paint Zuckerberg in, of course, the best light. But let's face it, he is an imagination connoisseur himself. And he did create probably the most transformative communications platform in human history, regardless of what you think of Facebook. The British actor and comedian, Sacha Baron Cohen, posted a scathing thread on Twitter in which he dubbed Zuckerberg's speech at Georgetown University on Thursday disingenuous and reminded the billionaire that he is not the government, but the owner of a private business and not subject to the First Amendment. Sacha Baron Cohen tweeted, "Just heard Mark Zuckerberg's disingenuous speech. He is not the government, but the owner of a private business and not subject to the First Amendment." That was on October 17th at 4:26 p.m. And he goes on to say, if he owned a fancy restaurant and 4 neo-Nazis came goose-stepping into the dining room and were talking loudly about wanting to kill Jewish scum, would he serve them an elegant 8-course meal? Or would he tell them to get the F out of his restaurant? It's the same thing, added the Borat star. He has every legal right, indeed a moral duty, to tell them to get the F out of his restaurant, concluded Cohen, who last year pranked numerous political figures with his satirical Showtime series, Who is America? And most recently portrayed real-life Mossad agent Eli Cohen in the Netflix thriller The Spy, which I want to get to. I haven't watched that yet. Looking forward to getting it. Zuckerberg's address also drew criticism from Bernice King, the daughter of the late civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. Zuckerberg, in his speech, alluded to the role of freedom of expression in the civil rights movement. I'd like to help Facebook better understand the challenges MLK faced from disinformation campaigns launched by politicians, King replied, a reference to Facebook's refusal to block ads featuring false statements from politicians. These campaigns created an atmosphere for his assassination, she added. Yikes. Well, it really it harks back to what I was alluding to yesterday. And I received, again, I'm very proud of all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community we are building here at the Burnettwork and specifically on Robservations, and all of you imagination connoisseurs. I have to say, I always, when I tweet out these shows are going on, I always say things like, you're the friendliest bunch of fans, you're the most avuncular bunch of fans, you're most intelligent bunch of fans. I really actually believe that. Not only am I watching the subscriber base slowly grow, slowly increase, hopefully, with your help, if you like and share these chats, we might get past 15,000 subscribers by the end of October. That's pretty good for 10 months of doing this show. Not bad at all. But I am surprised by how, actually I shouldn't be surprised, but how the content of your letters and comments just keeps going up and up and up and up. And, I think that's because of this community as a whole. I'm very happy to have the moderators that I have, whether it's Greg, Detective Jim, Terry, or Mike Bodden. We are going to bring in more moderators. I think it'd be nice to have a female moderator to sort of, who knows what Vesna and Willow Yang are going to go on about in the chats. I don't know. I mean, you never know, but I know it's exciting. But anyway, I think we are building a really great community of both people and, moderators. And I like the fact that we are cultivating this place. And while I do think that these issues of the last 2 days are a little political, I know that you guys are intelligent enough that I understand the Rise of Skywalker is the trailer is going to drop on Monday Night Football, theoretically, and tickets will go on sale. And we can talk about Star Wars all next week. But as I have said, as an imagination connoisseur, much of what I've read over the years, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, horror, whether it's movies, whether it's comics, have had political bents to them. And I don't, somebody said that they appreciate the fact that I'm not afraid to touch on political issues, but, Star Wars is political. It's about a band of rebel freedom fighters fighting against an evil galactic empire that is literally run by an evil part of the energy field that surrounds us and binds the galaxy together. But back again, I think what's really important is what I was saying yesterday, that Facebook as a public utility, as a company, it's a privately held company, obviously, but it is providing a international public service. It has to owe its customers something, doesn't it? I mean, like we were talking about yesterday about food. If you're selling chicken to the public, you can't not worry about whether or not it's infected or has E. coli in it. You have to have some responsibility to your consumer base that what you are serving up to them, whatever product it is, that you are aware that it is not going to be damaging to that person's health. Now, when we're talking about information and especially the free flow of ideas, that's different than food. But as we all know, why is it in our culture we spend more time talking about health issues than mental health issues? And what is a pernicious idea if not a perhaps poisoning influence for certain people? The same way that, say, meat tainted with E. coli or romaine lettuce or something that has to be recalled. It's so strange that we make those differences. I mean, shouldn't we be thinking holistically? Um, I want to start off with a letter. I got a letter, again, topical letter from Bo Sanders. Bo Sanders says, Rob, longtime writer, first time viewer. Wait, flip that, please. Much love to you, your show, and the ever increasing multitudes of imagination connoisseurs across the world. I wish to express my concerns with your recent remarks from show 251 concerning Mark Zuckerberg not wishing to police political speech. You suggested it is the obligation, if not duty, of information platforms such as Facebook to disseminate truths from falsehoods. I ask you, though, what truth should we believe? Should we have blindly accepted the story about there being a video of our president peeing on a hooker? Or maybe the one about how rolling back net neutrality would bring the World Wide Web to a grinding halt? How about the one regarding a Supreme Court justice nominee being part of a rape train in college? Or how the world will end in 12 years unless we stop using plastic straws and give the government even more control over our lives and livelihood? And who should be the gatekeepers of what's true? The New York Times, whose number of corrections and retractions could warrant their own separate edition? News anchors, perhaps? That would be nice if you could find ones that haven't been fired for making up stories for ratings or fiddling with subordinates. I certainly wouldn't want a back room filled with fresh college graduates determining what I should and shouldn't be able to share or read on an internet forum, unless, of course, it goes against specific laws or community standards. Free speech is protected under the Constitution as a basic human right. Receiving a mislabeled organic food or other product is not, though there are market regulations in place to deal with those bad apples. The day we start slapping regulations on human rights like free speech is the day we stop existing as a unique nation of free people. We definitely live in a glorious time when it comes to the technological advances in communication and information sharing. However, our progress is a double-edged sword, which we must accept. For as the free exchange of information increases, so does the number of half-truths and falsehoods. In order to truly remain a free society, we must continue to take the good with the bad and be free to disseminate facts from fiction on our own. Like you close your show every day, the truth is everyone does have a story to tell. I just would never want corporations, especially on a free-to-use platform, to determine whether these stories are worth telling. All the best to you in this community, and thank you so much for reading this letter. Bo Sanders, St. Louis, Missouri. Well, Bo, I have to say, stellar letter, sir. I find nothing but salient points in here, and your logic is sound. I can't disagree with anything that you've said. And I hate to say it. Well, I don't hate to say it. I agree with everything 100%. I really do. The problem is we have bad actors that are interested in subverting our democratic way of life, our republic, what people think. They're interested in seeing the cohesion, relatively speaking, of our body politic unravel, much like how radiation damages DNA. And they are doing it every single day. They're doing it even now as I speak to you. And there are people that want to see this great republic unravel for whatever reason. Some people, like the Joker, just want to watch the world burn. And I think that while I agree 100% with your points, we have to take the good with the bad. The problem is, for whatever reason, we're dealing with a lot of people that have bad impulses. And I would dare say that just look at the way our government's been behaving over the last, week. Are people, our allies ever going to trust us again? Do we have any real allies? Is there anybody that we believe is our ally? And I think that what's strange is a few hours before that I went on this chat, two women together, two female astronauts made the first tandem all-female spacewalk in orbit. Historical, amazing event. We always talk about gender nowadays and I've always said, you know what? Things are better now as far as inclusion and as far as representation than they've ever been. Does that mean they can't get better? No, certainly they can get better. We all know that. All of the people who are still marginalized and who are still not getting their fair shake understand this. We're in the midst of the Me Too movement still. And yet two women astronauts went out in space together. Our president, while discussing or talking to these women astronauts, was under the mistaken impression that this was the first time female astronauts ever made a spacewalk. Just a couple hours ago, the leader of the free world, who is talking to female astronauts, is under the impression that this was the first time women ever spacewalked. Now, this is annoying. I tweeted to Donald Trump. I said that my dogs, my two doodles, have gleaned more about the American space program watching me either build model rockets or play with my spaceships, and that is not a euphemism, than Donald Trump knows about the very people that he's speaking to in orbit, which is strange considering he should have been briefed and he should be told something about the people that he's talking to. And why was a tandem spacewalk with two women astronauts significant? First time it happened on his watch. But it shows how much thought and foresight he put into his conversation to orbit. Now, do I see that? Is this am I making a political statement? No, but I am expecting, like with Facebook, we as a nation owe it to ourselves and the rest of the world to know what the fuck we're talking about. Let's get educated. Let's perhaps not go on an international forum, talk to people in orbit, and not even know anything about the subject at hand. And that's what's so irksome. While I completely agree with what Bo is saying, we have to take the good with the bad. But why is it that we don't expect excellence? Why? Why aren't we demanding to get the best of the best? When I go to a movie theater, I expect to get the best of the best. I go to the Cinerama Dome, I go to the ArcLight, I go to the AMC in Burbank to go to one of their Dolby theaters. You know what? Yesterday, Rock and Roll Studio Canal puts out Angel Heart in 4K, not available in America, got it from the UK. Why do I want Angel Heart in 4K? Because it's the best version of the movie that exists. We can get that. We can demand excellence. We should demand excellence. We should demand it from our leaders, our politicians, and certainly, why shouldn't we demand Facebook do better? Do better. I mean, I understand we take the good with the bad, but there is this weird, I think, this pernicious direction that we're taking, that we're not demanding excellence, and we're demanding it's mediocrity. Certainly, that's what we're seeing in both Star Trek and Star Wars. And I think what's really interesting, people seem to be, I keep talking about Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, here for another video. Like, people are like, you talk about Jeremy, like how, and I'm like, you know what? The Fandom Menace channels, whether it's Midnight's Edge, whether it's Gary at Nerdrotic, or whether it's Jeremy, we all want the same things. We all want great genre entertainment. We want great comic books. I mean, I can't wait to read Hickman's first issue of X-Men that came out this week. And that's all anybody wants. Why aren't we demanding that across the board? Why isn't our baseline? Why can't we be getting the best information possible, written by the most qualified people that are with people that are vetting their sources? Because it helps us. We will live better lives. And I think Sacha Baron Cohen is right. While free speech and freedom of expression, you should never say that, okay, we can't allow neo-Nazis to demonstrate. Well, that is curtailing speech. But if you're a private company and it's your business, you don't have to allow it in your business. You don't have to. Rightly or wrongly, if neo-Nazis jackboots or they're in their jackboots and they goose step into your restaurant, I mean, I would not allow neo-Nazis in a restaurant or a bar that I was the proprietor of. I wouldn't. First of all, they're basically supporting a losing side against their own country. Why would you want to do that? I mean, I don't understand. But I think we need to demand the same way that we as imagination connoisseurs demand better of our entertainment, want the best entertainment, want to watch it in the best venues and get the best versions of things. Why shouldn't we expect that for ideas as well? I guess it's because when you live in a country where you're learning in order to take a test rather than actually really learning, really understanding the ideas and the concepts that you're supposed to be learning. The fact that intellectual inquiry at our institutes of higher learning are being quashed if an idea is objectionable to you. We live in a world where people are literally scared of ideas. Oh, I can't hear those words spoken because, oh my God, how terrible. As if these ideas don't already exist. I mean, anyway, I just want to talk about that briefly because I think it's important. And Bo's letter, it came in, topical letter, Sacha Baron Cohen's remarks. I just think that ultimately, we should all just do better. Don't we want things to be better? Like, don't you want the best? The reason that I want that $900 Gundam that Bandai's putting out is because it's the best die-cast Gundam that's ever been made. And it's also the new Gundam from Char's Counterattack, and I love that Gundam. So why wouldn't I want that as a collector, as a toy collector? Every time they put something new, my philosophy, just so you guys know, is I don't need all of the action figures of one character. I just want the best version. So I'm constantly swapping stuff out. That's, I don't need every Darth Vader that's come out, but I got to tell you, that quarter scale Darth Vader that Hot Toys is putting out, that some people around the world already have, that's supposed to be coming out soon here domestically. It's a quarter scale Vader. It's amazing. Who doesn't want that? Anyway. So, well, let's get in to see what you guys have to say. Stubble McShave says, he's here. In a recent interview, it was revealed Amazon would spend a bunch of dough on Wheel of Time, substantially more than was spent per episode of Game of Thrones. Well, as everyone knows, Stubble McShave, our favorite Swede, is, as far as I know, the world's biggest Wheel of Time fan. And based on Robert Jordan's seminal book series, and I think it's going to be amazing. I think that's great. If Amazon's spending a lot of money, and look, if they could make a Wheel of Time series that's as lush looking as Carnival Row, I think we're in for something. We're in for a treat. They're making the Foundation series. I mean, we imagination connoisseurs. Look, as much as I am sure after reading all the reviews of Watchmen. By the way, Watchmen debuts Sunday night. Woohoo! I mean, I know that I'm going to hate watch it. After just reading the reviews, and look, I'm going to go into it with an open mind, but I read what it's about, and I'm like, this is your sequel to The Watchmen, and it might be one and done. I think I'm going to have to talk about it. On Monday, you know what? Monday is definitely going to be a Watchmen recap day. We're going to have to talk Watchmen. We're going to have to talk Alan Moore. We're going to have to talk about how the poor man has been taking it in the keister since the mid-'80s because of their desire to keep the Watchmen gravy train running. It's really sad what they did to poor old Alan Moore regarding Watchmen. But the series is going to be interesting. But anyway, I mean, we're getting Wheel of Time. I can only imagine they're going to have to. I mean, to make these shows now. Look at Witcher. The Witcher show coming out is going to use mostly practical effects when they can. We got Mandalorian. The bar for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror television it's being just upped exponentially. And how great are we? Aren't we better off for it? Pretty amazing. Joel Summers is here. Joel Summers sends in a letter. Love this letter, Joel. Rob, like you, one of my favorite artists of all time is Prince Rogers Nelson. Since Robservations is often the milieu where fans come together to discuss the handling of beloved franchises, I thought I'd posit what a great job the Prince estate has been doing with the legacy of the artist. Most recently, they've released a 4 CD and 1 DVD 1999 deluxe edition. Rob, it is stellar. It contains alternate versions, new material, and a nearly perfect live concert. Amid so much chatter claiming how deleterious is the handling of the franchises we revere, it's nice to reflect on at least one example that which we cherish is being honored in a way that looks to new horizons and in a way that honors fans. Have you kept up with the material being curated by the Prince estate, Rob? Do you approve? Thanks for what you do, Joel. Joel, first of all, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay when it comes to how is the Prince estate handling the release of his material. Let me see, just today. So I get the Prince emails. I get like one a day. Now, for those of you who don't know, it just dropped on YouTube. There is a demo version of I Feel For You, the Shaka Khan. I feel for you. I think I love you too. Now. They just put out a demo version of Prince. It's Prince's song originally. An exclusive made-to-order 7-inch single featuring the 1979 acoustic demo recording, available for a very limited time. It is on purple vinyl. That just came out. Hell, I'll read it. I'll read you the email I got. In honor of the 40th anniversary of Prince's second album, Prince, which was released on October 19th, 1979, of course, which he played everything on and also produced, the Prince estate and Warner Records are pleased to announce the surprise release of a previously unheard solo acoustic demo recording of the Grammy-winning Prince track, I Feel For You, available on streaming services and as a limited-run 7-inch vinyl single. The new 2-track 7-inch includes the acoustic demo of I Feel For You on the A side and the original studio recording on the B side, pressed on commemorative purple vinyl. The special stripped-down demo recording captures a 20-year-old Prince in a raw, intimate moment and begins with the sound of the artist pressing the record button on a cassette tape recorder and picking up an acoustic guitar. The recording was created in the winter of 1978-79, around the time Prince was preparing to make his solo debut at the Capri Theater in North Minneapolis, and it was recently rediscovered on one of the countless cassette tapes stored in his legendary vault. What must be in there? The fully produced studio recording of I Feel For You was included on Prince's second album, Prince. It would become a hit a few years later when it was covered by Shaka Khan and released as the title track of her solo album, I Feel For You, in 1984. Her version, which featured a cameo by the rapper Mel Mel, became a top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned 2 Grammys, including a Grammy Award for Best R&B Song that honored Prince's contributions as a songwriter. So let me just tell you, the Prince... I love Prince. I've always loved Prince. I've loved Prince. When did I first love Prince? I think I first loved Prince when I first heard Dirty Mind. No, yeah, it was probably Dirty Mind, and that led me backwards to Controversy, For You, and Prince. Or would it be Controversy, Prince, and For You? And then, of course, 1999 came out, and I couldn't get enough. I mean, 1999... And yes, the 1999 re-release, I do not have it yet. They've released it on both vinyl and CD. It is spectacular. 1999 has some of my favorite Prince songs. As a matter of fact, it was a 2-disc set, and side 2 had 2 songs, if memory serves, Let's Pretend We're Married and DMSR, Dance Music, Sex, Romance. Let's Pretend We're Married, Go All Night. I'm not trying to be nasty, but I sincerely want to the taste out of your mouth. Can you relate? I love that. International Lover. All the Critics Love You in New York. I mean, of course, you got Delirious and Little Red Corvette, but it's the rest of 1999 that I dearly love. And it's amazing what they're doing, what the Prince estate is doing. There must be thousands and thousands of tapes and unreleased material there. I can't even imagine, but I do think they're doing a fine job for Prince fans. I mean, for so long, we bought so many bootlegs. And I feel bad. I mean, you know, Prince hated the fact that there were bootlegs. And there were a lot of them. Famously, the Black Album was only available as a bootleg for the longest time. And of course, yeah, I spent a lot of money on the Black Album, and I guess the bootlegs of the Black Album were made because the album was actually pressed. There were versions that were pressed that got out, and people made CDs of them. And when I first moved to LA in '88, there was a store on 3rd called CD Bonsai, and I would go to CD Bonsai all the time, and they had the best bootlegs and stuff from all over the world. And I bought the Black Album there. So yes, I think it's great that Warner Brothers and the Prince Estate are releasing these things. They just released his Cloud guitar, his famous guitar, his Purple Rain guitar from Purple Rain, the Cloud guitar. The guy who made those, they had a limited run of white and blue Cloud guitars, and I wanted to buy one. I don't play the guitar, but I would have taught myself with some app. But I really wanted to buy one, and I was like, yeah, I don't play the guitar, but I would love to have owned one. Maybe they'll do another run. But yeah, I want to thank you for that letter, Joel. But yes, I am deliriously excited every time they release something new, and the apparel and it's great. As a matter of fact, I have a tambourine with Prince's glyph on it. You can't really see it, but it's above my quarter scale Catherine Trammell, right over there. It's hanging on the wall that I bought when I saw Prince. One of the many times I saw Prince at the Staples Center. Well, I mean, I saw Prince a lot, but I only saw him once at the Staples Center, but I bought it at that concert. So back in the 90s. So thank you for that letter. I love talking about Prince. I don't talk about Prince enough. But yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I've been listening to Prince since 81, 82. And I think I can't get enough. Jeffrey Mao is here. Jeffrey Mao says, "Good morning, Rob. Your recent musings on West Side Story and Steven Spielberg's upcoming film adaptation of it got me thinking and has inspired me to write a 2-part letter." Wow, can you believe that? Jeffrey, I can. However, neither letter will be about West Side Story, as I'm not particularly interested in it, but rather related topics. My first letter will be about the author whose work inspired West Side Story, and that would, of course, be old Bill the Bard himself, William Shakespeare. Now, there's not much about Shakespeare that I need to talk much about that hasn't already been said a million billion times already. However, I will say that if you are in any way interested in stories and storytelling, then you must at least have a good familiarity with most of his more important plays. I don't mean that you need to know all of his odes and poems and kind of his more obscure plays, but certainly the big ones. And no, having watched Shakespeare in Love does not count. With regard to these bizarre conspiracy theories that have arisen over the years, saying that somehow Shakespeare is not the sole author of all or some of the plays that are attributed to him or never existed, is really rather ridiculous. Because ultimately, as the English would say, some bloke wrote the bloody things and they're bloody amazing. So let's just appreciate them and not worry about who actually really wrote them. Unless, of course, it was, William Shakespeare himself who wrote them. An appreciation for Shakespeare also assists one in better understanding the English language. I expect anyone who can read through and decipher at least a few of his more important plays will come away with a much greater appreciation for the history of the language, its nuances, as well as how language has changed over the past 400 plus years, and in some cases, how it hasn't. Like with most people, I first became engrossed or exposed to Shakespeare in school. During middle school, I forget which grade, we had a class project to film scenes from Romeo and Juliet. We gathered at a classmate's house one weekend for a day of shooting. As with most class projects, everyone wore many hats. I think I played a number of smaller characters, and we shot part of the last act with the death scenes of Romeo and Juliet. I can just imagine how doing that film project with today's technology would have been completely different. We had to use camcorders and do the old double VCR editing setup. Oof, if I recall correctly. Later on, I, of course, bought a copy of Shakespeare's complete works, and I attended a couple of performances, one of Hamlet and one of A Comedy of Errors. I think Hamlet was during high school and A Comedy of Errors was college. The Hamlet performance was quite interesting and experimental. It was not on a stage, but was performed inside a building that was, I believe, on the campus of Bryn Mawr College that had a castle-like feel to it. Basically, we, the audience, would go from room to room and the play was acted out in front of us. There was something called Sleep No More that's big in New York. I think it's still going, where you do the same thing. It was amazing. If you haven't seen Sleep No More, it's based on Shakespeare's works, in addition to a few other things. It's pretty amazing. It was a pretty cool, intimate, and involving performance, if memory serves. I'm going back almost 30 years now. Hamlet was played by two different actors, and they represented the dual nature of the character, which means that they turned the to be or not to be monologue into a duologue. In terms of Shakespeare films, I've seen most of the well-known ones, including, yes, Shakespeare in Love. I had the Branagh Hamlet on Laserdisc, and I think I only watched through it once, as it's, well, 4 freaking hours long. I think it had to have been 4-disc set, so watching that on Laserdisc meant 3 disc changes and 4 side flips, if not more. It also came in a box. Remember that? The Gibson Hamlet was decent, but a bit middle of the road, whereas the Branagh version would definitely appeal more to the Shakespearean purist, as it's the complete version. I was quite interested in seeing how they would act out the parts that usually got cut from the film versions. But it's really the Ian McKellen Richard III film that really got my imagination going and led me to think about different ways to adapt Shakespeare plays that would translate well and capture that similar vibe to Richard III. I got to step in here. If you, over or under that Rob Burnett has Richard III on Blu-ray, over under 60%. Well, it's 100 because I do. I love, if you haven't seen Ian McKellen's version of Richard III, bruh, you got to check it out. And Julie Taymor's version of Titus Andronicus with Anthony Hopkins. As a matter of fact, watch them as a double bill one day because they're rad. The first would be to do Hamlet straight up Viking style, as historically accurate as possible, which is to say not very accurate at all. However, most experts would probably put the setting of Hamlet around the 10th to 12th centuries, and I'd love to see Hamlet done that way. My biggest challenge would be to make Hamlet as a character work in a pretty rough and tumble setting without him appearing too out of place. My other idea is to do a Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra duology set in either the Napoleonic era or the fascist 1930s. Obviously, the fascist 1930s setting was used to great effect by Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater adaptation of Caesar. I'm certain that that influenced the adaptation of the McKellen Richard III film. You're probably right about that. In both the Napoleonic era and in the 1930s, we have charismatic European conquerors on the rise, and both had military campaigns in Northern Africa. When I read both Julius Caesar and then Antony and Cleopatra, I would imagine the scenes being acted out in either of those settings. In a lot of scenes, I felt that it would work quite well. When the anti-Caesar conspirators are getting together, I would imagine them in dark, smoke-filled rooms going over a list of friends and enemies. On the other hand, I wouldn't randomly have, say, Hamlet set in modern-day New York. I would want a setting, well, they did that, didn't they, with Ethan Hawke? I would want a setting, or wait, what was it that they did recently? Was it Hamlet? Ethan Hawke was in it? I think that's why you brought it up. I would want a setting where I could enact the actual play, and it would fit right in like it belonged there. There's obviously a timeless appeal to Shakespeare's plays, but I think you still have to choose settings if you're going non-traditional that still evoke the mood and atmosphere of the original. Well, Rob, those are my thoughts on Shakespeare, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are along with the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity. Stay tuned for part 2, where I talk about my favorite musical. Have a great weekend, Jeff. Well, Jeff, you know, I've gotten quite fond of your letters. You're always covering interesting topics. Look, I agree with you. You know, I think that you really, if you grew up in the West, if you're part of Western civilization, indeed human civilization, you need to have a working knowledge of not just the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, but Shakespeare, because like stories like Job, one of my favorite stories, Job in the old book, I love Job. And I love Shakespeare's stories. And what's really interesting is the fact that how Shakespeare can be transposed into different settings, like, for instance, you know, 50s New York, early 60s New York for West Side Story, which is, of course, the retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and it works. Or, you know, Baz Luhrmann can go down, I think he went into Mexico when he shot his version of Romeo and Juliet, which I like to think of as the Blade Runner version of Shakespeare. I love Baz Luhrmann's version of "Do you bite your thumb at me, sir?" I mean, I love all that. the way he used contemporary music and layered it into the narrative and the production design and the actors. And I love all that. If you Richard III, I mean, even though it's more of a fascistic version, and Titus, Julie Taymor's Titus, they're great stories. They're timeless because they're about what I always said. What is any great story about? The timeless human truths. And Shakespeare, for whatever reason, man, that guy could drill down into those timeless human truths, and they all work. And all the great catchphrases. I mean, there's so many great catchphrases in our culture, that a lot of them come from Hamlet, that a lot of people use, and you don't even know that they're from Shakespeare. And I love that. I mean, I think that you need to have a working knowledge of Shakespeare if you want to appreciate any good storytelling. And the problem is the way it's introduced. When you start reading, I remember I was caught up. Part of the reason I it's hard for me to pick up a foreign language. I found it frustrating whether I was learning Hebrew before my bar mitzvah or whether I was learning Spanish. Because I couldn't read right away, because I read so much, I'm constantly reading something, whether it's books or comics or liner notes, or I mean, this Angel Heart disc comes with a big booklet in it. How cool is that? But I'm always reading something. And it's frustrating to not be able to read, like to go back and be back in elementary school, Dan bat el habayit ima ba'a elha. I mean, trying to read Hebrew back then, I was going crazy. So when you're reading Shakespeare, when you're first starting out, they kind of throw you into the deep end. Now we're going to read Shakespeare, and you don't really get a primer on how to approach language. And like you so astutely pointed out, how language changes over time and how Shakespeare has really shown the English language changing over time. And I think that's really important. But, in school, I remember being frustrated. I'm like, wait a minute. I wish we were sort of given at least a day of learning the differences in the language so I could enjoy it more. I mean, once you get into the rhythms and all of that, then it becomes easier. But the way they teach Shakespeare, even back in the day when I was a little child, it still was frustrating because you're going to it like, I can't read this. I don't know how to read this. How do these letters and what is the phraseology here? They should give you some of that, even though they don't. But everybody should know their Shakespeare. When my grandfather died, one of the things I commandeered from his house was his old books when he was at Princeton. And he had this great thick, the complete works of Shakespeare. It's awesome. I have it on my shelf, my Imaginarium. And I've gone through about half of it, but it's so much fun to pick up because even though it's from the 30s, early 30s, late 20s, I just love it. And, it feels right reading Shakespeare out of this thick book of all of his works that was published almost 100 years ago. Love it. But thank you for writing in. Quite enjoy talking about Shakespeare. Our man Ian Samuels is back. Ian Samuels is back with, actually, I love this letter because it's Halloween themed and I get to talk about, I'm just going to let Ian take it away. Ian says, best zombie movie of all time. When a film can count amongst its fans Quentin Tarantino, Stephen King, and George Romero, rest in peace, and is often seen in lists of greatest horror films of all time, greatest comedy films of all time, and greatest films of all time. This film is, of course, Shaun of the Dead. Laterly, the first of the Three Flavors trilogy, or the Cornetto trilogy, right? Based on a sequence in the TV series Spaced, which was written by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright, and directed by Edgar Wright, and starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. I have Spaced on DVD. The same group who made, wrote, and starred in the trilogy. Wright and Pegg became fans of George Romero. Wright and Pegg, being fans of George Romero's work, especially his seminal zombie movie Dawn of the Dead, decided to make a zombie film themselves. In fact, this was not Edgar Wright's first foray into making a zombie film. In 1993, Edgar made a short film called Dead Right. Not only was this a zombie film, but had zombies attacking a supermarket, and the supermarket that Edgar had worked at previously, and the supermarket they returned to film in for Hot Fuzz. George Romero was invited to a private screening of Shaun of the Dead, and he declared it as a great movie and at least the fourth best zombie movie ever made. I assume that is fourth after his own Night, Dawn, and Day of the Dead. A year after Shaun of the Dead, George made a fourth part to his trilogy called Land of the Dead, and Peg and Wright appeared as caged zombies in the cage fighting scene with Ozzy Argento. Shaun of the Dead works as so many things. It's an excellent example of a zombie movie, a horror movie, a survival horror movie, a comedy movie, a romantic comedy movie, and a comedy horror movie, and a family drama, I would offer. It has quite rightly achieved many accolades. Not many films can boast to be a comedy, a horror, a romance, and a zombie, and a survival horror all at the same time, and do all of them very well. But does it make this the best zombie movie of all time? I would say that it doesn't quite match up to the majesty of Dawn of the Dead. But unlike George, I would say it is not the fourth, but is up there as number 2 behind Dawn. And that comes from Ian Samuels. Well, Ian, once again, thank you for another great letter. As many people know, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite, not just my favorite horror movies, but one of my favorite movies of all time. And what's interesting is both Shaun of the Dead and The Walking Dead basically take place in the same universe. I mean, not canonically, but they do. They take place in the same universe that George Romero brought us in the late 60s with Night of the Living Dead. Now, I would dare say, to me, Night of the Living Dead is, after what's happened, especially over the last, 50 plus years with the zombie genre, I think Night of the Living Dead is one of the most important horror films ever made. And in terms of best horror films ever made, I definitely would put it in the top 5. 100%. Now, the thing about Dawn of the Dead is, as much as I love Dawn of the Dead more than I like Night of the Living Dead, but Night of the Living Dead is much more important as far as the horror genre is concerned. There's so much that Night of the Living Dead does. And, a lot of people talk about the birth of modern horror being, say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I've always believed that, no, it goes back into the 60s with Night of the Living Dead because of the social commentary, the balls to the wall, hell's a poppin' violence and horror. And it's the idea of a black protagonist surviving only to be accidentally killed in the end by the white militia. I mean, there's so much going on in Night of the Living Dead, and it's actually a beautifully made film. You had a group of people that were in Pittsburgh that were making local TV commercials that really stepped up their game. And you can see Romero's innate talent, both as a director and as a writer and as an editor. Romero was an editor that you go back and you watch The Crazies, which he made before Dawn of the Dead. You look at The Crazies, the editing in The Crazies is phenomenal. And for me, he was heavily influential in my desire to want to be an editor. But I do think I got to put Night of the Living Dead, in terms of its importance, above Dawn of the Dead, in terms of a zombie film, because it really set the tone. Now, you can also talk about the fact that there's other zombie movies. There's the Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue, is that Rue Morgue? I think. There's, of course, Tombs of the Blind Dead. There's many different kinds of zombie movies. There are. But it's the Romero zombie movies that are set squarely in the real world. The verisimilitude, I mean, Romero set the tone. And in a way, after Night of the Living Dead, which is a relentlessly downbeat movie that, in terms of pacing, my God, it gets right into it. Broad daylight when you first meet a zombie. It's amazing. And, I think one of the great images, the great moments in all of horror cinema is that graveyard zombie that is at the beginning of that's at the beginning of Night of the Living Dead. And as we see this zombie draw ever closer to Barbara and her brother, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now. Little did he know. I mean, if you haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, and I know everyone thinks, no one ever wants to admit they haven't seen a great classic. But this Halloween, do yourself a favor. Get the Criterion Blu-ray of Night of the Living Dead and watch it, because turn the lights out, pop the popcorn, and watch it. Because even though you've probably watched a steady diet of Walking Dead and all that, Night of the Living Dead is where it really began. I know there's I Walk with the Zombie. I know, I get all that. But the modern zombie film, as we understand it, began. Ground Zero was Night of the Living Dead, and it's, I think, the most important zombie movie ever made. That said, I love Shaun of the Dead for all the reasons that Ian Samuel said. But Shaun of the Dead is obviously made by huge imagination connoisseurs. Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg love Dawn of the Dead as much as I mean, I would. There's a movie that I would love to have made. It would have been Shaun of the Dead. I wish I knew those guys. When I watched Space, I saw Space right after Free Enterprise had come out, and I was like, oh, I wish those dudes. I'd totally be friends with those guys. And I loved Space, but I loved Shaun of the Dead. I think, as Ian pointed out, it works on many different levels. One, it is a great zombie movie. It is a great horror film. It's just that, rather than law enforcement and reporters in Dawn of the Dead, you got these two schlep rock best friends who are just the British everyman. Let's go to the pub and drink. Let's listen to records. Let's go to the occasional club. That's what I loved about it. It's like, if there was a real zombie outbreak, what would happen to most of us? Because we're just everyday workaday people. What would you do? And so it works from that level, and the humor is all situational. Sure, there are goofy, funny things like when they're throwing records at the zombies, but it's also it never betrays its premise or its situation by undercutting it, or it doesn't. The humor does not come at the expense of the characters. It's all situational. It's all very funny, and I think it's a great comedy. I also, what happens in the course of the film, it is a real horror film, and there is real pathos and danger. And it's also sad, and it also does work as survival horror, and there is some good gore in it. And for everything that Ian said, I totally agree. I think Shaun of the Dead is a terrific movie, but it owes a huge debt of gratitude to, obviously, Romero's holy trilogy of Night, Dawn, and Day. Probably the most, I would dare say, maybe the most satisfying horror trilogy of all time is Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead. They're different films. They all have different feels, but I think definitely three of my favorite horror films of all time that are dealing with, the thing about the zombie apocalypse, and why I love, it's so funny now because now everyone loves zombies. But there was a Clive Barker, I guess, comic book story about what was going on in England when Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead happened. There's, of course, John Skipp and Craig Spector edited two different anthologies, Books of the Dead, back in the, I want to say, late 80s or early 90s, where everything was set in Romero's universe. And there has been, since then, how many zombie survival novels have I read, to the point where I'm like, and then, of course, we've even had movies that a lot of people forget are great zombie movies, but show a different version of the zombie apocalypse, like The Girl with All the Gifts. If you haven't seen The Girl with All the Gifts, oh man, you got to watch The Girl with All the Gifts. That is a great zombie movie that has a different approach. It's based on a novel, but it's more of that, like, that parasitic thing that happens to ants or whatever, that parasite that drives the ants. It's great. If you guys haven't seen Girl with All the Gifts, it's awesome. But I agree with Ian. This Halloween season, do yourself a favor. Hey, hell, have a zombie marathon. Watch Night, Dawn, and Day. Watch Return of the Living Dead, which is a punk rock comedy Living Dead film. Watch Return of the Living Dead 2. I hate to say it. I never want to say this about any filmmaker's work, but Return of the Living Dead 2 is garbage. It's unbearable. It is just horrifically awful. But Return of the Living Dead 3, definitely worth a watch. And go back and watch some Euro zombie films. One of my favorite zombie movies that nobody ever talks about, Jean Rollins' The Living Dead Girl. Of course, Jean Rollin is known for his lesbian vampire movies like Fascination. I mean, yes, they're made by a dude that wanted to see lots of naked flesh and lots of girls' boobies. Nothing wrong with that. But I do find The Living Dead Girl, Jean Rollins' The Living Dead Girl, probably his best film. It's very lyrical. Now, I understand, look, it's French, and it's very low budget, but there is something, I think, beautiful and storybook-like. Check that out. That's another good zombie movie to watch. Tombs of the Blind Dead, which I've always loved. I think Armando Diosorio's He made 4 movies about the undead. The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue, I think, is what I'm thinking about. Got to see that. I know that Don May is I believe he just did a 4K restoration of that. But yeah, there's a lot of zombie movies out there that are not Psychomania. That's an interesting one. But yeah, check it out. Zombie movies, I love them. But now everybody, are we all zombied out? Can you ever make another zombie movie again? I don't know. But I do love zombie movies. Let's see if anybody's out there in the chat. I've been neglecting you. No, I guess not. I guess I have not been neglecting anyone. But anyway, let's see. I have more letters to read. And this next one comes from Samuel Phoenix. Samuel Phoenix, I love this. Another Halloween-related letter. Rob, I wanted to get back on my point about Childs at the end of The Thing. Here is why I think he is infected. We've seen that when the Thing transforms into its host, it takes time for the transformation process to happen. Okay, before I get into this, I got to explain, like, John Carpenter's The Thing ends with Keith David's character Childs and MacReady, Kurt Russell's MacReady, after surviving the onslaught of the Thing. They're staying. After their base is burning down. They're in the cold, the Antarctic snow, and they're there, wondering if either one of them is actually the Thing, and that's how the movie ends. So that's we're talking about. I was asked earlier this week, do I think that Childs or MacReady, either one of them was infected, or were they both? And I've always been of the opinion that neither one of them were, and they're just going to be sitting there until they freeze to death, wondering. And that's kind of how I always thought that was sort of poetic justice, because if one of them was the Thing, the Thing would devour the other or whatever. So I always thought that the paranoia that these two guys had, they're just going to sit there distrustful of one another until they freeze to death. And that I always thought was sort of the poetic ending of that movie in my mind. But anyway, Rob, I want to get back to my point about Childs at the end of the Thing. Here's why I think Childs is infected. We've seen that when the Thing transforms into its host, it takes time for the transformation process to happen. When Bennings gets infected and tries to hide outside, his hands aren't completely transformed and he doesn't have the ability to communicate. I assume it is because the organism prioritizes the visible aspects like body, eyes, hair, etc., to hide as quickly as it can, and then it slowly adapts the rest, like memories, smell, speech, taste, etc. Now, the bottle that MacReady gives to Childs at the end is a J&B whiskey bottle, which MacReady used during the movie to put gasoline in to use as a weapon. MacReady couldn't have gotten new ones because the whole base is on fire, including his watchtower. Ooh. Now, if we take a look at the facts, J&B is 40% whiskey, and whiskey is ethanol-based. With that percentage of alcohol in the bottle, the freezing point of this substance is around minus 25 degrees Celsius. Gasoline, on the other hand, freezes between 40 degrees Celsius and 200 degrees Celsius. Knowing the story takes place within an Antarctica station, we can assume they planned accordingly and that the gasoline won't freeze at 40 below zero. Continuing with facts, in 1982, the lowest temperature recorded was 82.6 degrees Celsius at the Vostok station, which is not that far from the station where the movie takes place if we take into consideration the map we see in the movie. All that is to say that the temperature at night during a snowstorm in Antarctica in 1982 is probably below minus 25 degrees Celsius, which means the bottles contain gasoline and not whiskey. Then at the end, Childs takes a sip of the bottle that MacReady gives him and doesn't react. We now know for a fact that it was gasoline in the bottle because of the outside temperature, since the alcohol would have frozen. And if we take into consideration that transforming into the host takes time, Maybe the organism has not developed taste yet and just played it cool, no pun intended. Plus, as soon as he drinks, the theme music starts, which is a weird moment to start the music. And then McReady smirks like he finds the situation funny, as if he knows what he just gave to him was gasoline and not whiskey. To me, it is proof that Childs was infected. If not, what was he doing the whole time? Rob, have I cracked the code or am I missing something? Maybe I'm going too much into details. And maybe Carpenter didn't think of the temperature of the liquids, but I like to think that he's that smart and that I'm right so I can sleep better at night. What are your thoughts? Well, Samuel, let me just say this is the best theory about the thing that I've read, and I've read a lot of them. And there was a sequel comic too, which I was talking about that Dark Horse published. You know what? You've convinced me. You've obviously put a lot of thought, a lot of research into this, and I'll buy it. But I think here's the thing. I do think you're making a lot of suppositions here that are not, I mean, they're good suppositions, but we don't know. We don't know. Maybe the fire heated up the alcohol. We don't know. We just don't know. And I think obviously he did make Molotov cocktails. Maybe he said, knowing he's McReady, he probably saved himself, a little bit of his hooch, his stashed drink, because by God, what's going to keep him warm? So I'd like to think that ultimately, in my mind, while I love your idea, I'm still going to go, while you convince me, I think this is a great theory. I think it's a viable theory, and I'm going to use it when I'm drunk one night talking about the thing. I'll give you full credit, of course. But I do think that you've made many, many suppositions here about things. And but I do love this theory. I'm still going to go with mine because I like to believe that these two guys who are now so paranoid can't get it together and figure out a way to, like, they know the Norwegian base. Will they ever be able to get there? Could they go in that half track? I mean, I know it's been destroyed, but could they fix it? Who knows? But they won't trust each other. They won't band together and save themselves because they're too paranoid. And it's kind of, I like that. The Thing is the first movie in what John Carpenter has loosely called his Apocalypse trilogy. It's true. And The Thing, because he basically, John Carpenter said when the movie ends, the insinuation is that eventually that base will be discovered and the thing, the material will get out and take over the whole world. So he thinks it's about the end of the world. So, and then the next of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, if I may wax rhapsodic, was one of my favorite John Carpenter films, and indeed one of my favorite horror movies of the 80s, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which was the first of 3 movies John Carpenter was going to make. It was after Big Trouble in Little China, and he was depressed. He had this great career as an independent filmmaker. He had tremendous success. He started out with this, of course, Dark Stars was a student project, but his first feature film that was made as a feature film was Assault on Precinct 13. Great little movie, also shot in widescreen. Then he made Halloween. We all know how that turned out. Enormous success, followed up by The Fog, followed up by Escape from New York. And The Fog and Escape from New York were both Avco Embassy pictures, and they did quite well. And they were big hits. And Escape from New York was like $4 million. And then, of course, after Escape from New York in 81, he made The Thing. And that was his biggest budget movie. It was a big Universal release. He had Rob Bottin doing the effects. Came out in the summer of 1982, still the greatest summer for genre films ever. But unfortunately, it came out weeks after E.T., and it died a horrible box office death. And then, of course, Carpenter went on to do things like he made his adaptation of Stephen King's novel Christine after that. He made Starman after that. And then he made, of course, Big Trouble in Little China. That was a movie that was so far ahead of its time. The wuxia genre, nobody knew what that was. I mean, Zoo Warriors of the Magic Mountain, who knew? But he did. And of course, everyone liked Big Trouble in Little China. Again, in 1986, Fox was promoting the summer of 86. Fox had 3 big, what they thought were huge genre movies coming out. They had the sequel, James Cameron's sequel to Aliens. They had, of course, Cronenberg's The Fly, both genre classics. And I would dare say also the third movie was Big Trouble in Little China. So, and Fox was promoting all three together, like it's the genre summer of 1986, brought to you by 20th Century Fox. And of course, Big Trouble in Little China didn't do well. So John Carpenter went back to his indie roots, and he made a deal with the Live Films, and he was going to make 3 films that were going to be released through Universal, financed by Alive. And the first of those was the second movie in John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, Prince of Darkness. I love Prince of Darkness. It's one of my favorite horror films of the 80s. It's so good. It was made for about $3 million. Another siege movie, kind of like Assault on Precinct 13. And it's a great, it's about it's science meets religion, and really interesting depiction of Satan, or whatever that person is, or the creature is. I love Prince of Darkness. It's one of John Carpenter's greatest scores. And of course, he followed that up with his second Alive movie, which was They Live, in 88. And the third movie never got made for Alive. But the third movie in Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy is, of course, In the Mouth of Madness, that owes a great debt of gratitude. It's basically his riff on H.P. Lovecraft, that was written by New Line executive Mike DeLuca, surprisingly enough. I love In the Mouth of Madness. I think it's great. It's not a perfect movie, but it's certainly right up there. What a great trilogy. I don't even know. I'm so far in the weeds. You were talking about The Thing, Samuel, but thank you. I love John Carpenter. I always wanted to be a combination of John Carpenter, Stanley Kubrick, and David Cronenberg, but I ended up making a comedy. Oh, well, one comedy 20 years ago. Maybe one day I'll make another movie that I direct and write. I hope so. But thanks for writing in. I appreciate that. Man, sometimes I'll start talking and I'm like, what am I saying? I have no idea. Adam Blue is here. He says, I love Prince of Darkness. That's what my next letter will be about. Well, Adam Blue, please write in about Prince of Darkness. I love Prince of Darkness. And for those of you who don't know, oh my God, my beloved Canal Plus, Studio Canal, that released Angel Heart. Let me plug it again. Angel Heart on 4K. They released a 4-disc set of Prince of Darkness. They did 4 Carpenter movies, 4 4K Carpenter movies. They did Prince of Darkness, They Live, The Fog, and Escape from New York. And they're awesome. The 4K discs are awesome. 4-disc sets that come with the soundtrack. I can't recommend them highly enough. They're great discs. Prince of Darkness is great. The god plutonium will not save you. In fact, you will not be saved. I love Prince of Darkness. It's so good. How I wish the late, great Lisa Blount was still alive and Carpenter could make a sequel. I think it'd be great. Rick Berg says, one of the greatest things I ever learned came from a zombie movie. How do you kill something that is already dead? Plan 9 from Outer Space. Well, it's funny. If something is already dead, but it's ambulatory and it's moving around, is it really, in fact, dead? Who's to say? One does not know. I'm going to read this. Ian Samuels sent me another letter. 2 letters from Ian Samuels. This is a quick one. Rob, I love the cheesy old movies from the 80s like Hawk the Slayer. I once wrote a story called Prince Van Rental, Vampire Hunter, based on those kinds of films. Prince Van Rental. He has an aide named Edom who spends the whole story trying to invent his own cheese. Had a lot of humor in it, such as the elder of the village who wrote to Van Rental for his help describes that as many of their virgin girls have gone missing, they've ordered more from a catalog, but before the new order arrives, they need his help. He carries out on one of his tests and turns to Edom and announces, as I expected, this is a virgin girls only vampire. We must cut off his supply, and raises an eyebrow. Do you think that would be worth resurrecting this idea? Would it work today? Somehow something in the hashtag #MeToo movement would say probably not, Ian, but you know what? Sounds good to me. I mean, it kind of makes me sad. I think that I have encountered this in my own life. I mean, there was, especially in Hammer horror and the Jean Rollin vampire movies, there has always been a titillation factor, literally and figuratively, in horror. And it's very strange. I think one of the things that horror deals with biology, it deals with flesh, and it deals with desire, and it deals with the carnal nature of life. And I think that it's difficult to get into that nitty-gritty now without offending somebody. This idea of lust, both the lust of men and women, to deal with that carnality is something that is sort of frowned upon. And I'm kind of disappointed by that. It's weird that we have to live, and I understand people are like, well, the male gaze has been denigrating, or the patriarchal male gaze has been going after, I don't know what you call it, but yes, the male gaze has turned women into objects since the dawn of time. That is very true. But there is also a biological necessity for that. And I think that part of the horror genre, our baser instincts, I don't want to see them bled out of horror. I like all that. That's why I like looking at Hammer movies. Hammer movies are fun. I go back and talk about, I love the Karnstein vampire trilogy. The Vampire Lovers, Twins of Evil, and Lust, or actually Vampire Lovers, Lust for Vampire, and Twins of Evil. I love those movies. They're gothic, but they're a little cheesy. There's a lot of cheesecake in them, and I love them. I love Vampire Circus. I've talked about how much I love Vampire Circus. I also love, more serious Hammer fare like the Quatermass movies or The Devil Rides Out, which I love. And then there's just something about that whole realm. It's Victorian vampirism, and it's subverting those old Victorian sort of the Victorian stuffiness. There's no better era of exploitation than Victorian England, and bringing vampires into Victorian England to subvert the mores of the day. I love all that. I think it's great, and I don't ever want it to go away. And I love all that. So check that out. This is a good letter. I like this letter. This comes from James Wallace, my new good buddy, James Wallace. He is a very active member of the Imagination Connoisseur community. James has been writing in a lot. Always good to hear from him. Hi, Rob. So I received yesterday Scarface in 4K, and the transfer is pretty good. A few shots here and there could have used some polish, but it's worth it to see the subtleties in Pacino's face that you probably can't witness unless you see it on film. Initially, I wasn't planning on spending 3 hours to watch the film tonight, but after watching the 35th anniversary Q&A Tribeca held back in 2018, that is a bonus feature, I just had to watch the film immediately. A few things struck me while watching the Q&A. The moderator was terrible. Some of his questions, not good. Pretty convinced Stephen Bauer was drunk. And the talk of the remake came up. Now, for those of you who don't know, Scarface 1983 was a remake of Scarface that was made by Howard Hawks in 1932. So a 50-year difference. Al Pacino saw a screening of the 1932 film at a theater in Los Angeles and thought that it would be an interesting role to tackle. I've heard talk about a remake since maybe 2006 or 2007. At one point, Antoine Fuqua was going to direct it. The other question the moderator asked was if a woman should play the new incarnation of Scarface. Michelle Pfeiffer piped in and said no. Brian De Palma followed up by saying a woman shouldn't play the new incarnation either. Thank God for those blunt answers, which the moderator was expecting the opposite. Tired of actors placating like Pierce Brosnan saying Bond should be a woman in the next incarnation. By the way, apparently they've just announced, or they announced that they're going to develop a new 007 spinoff with our new 007, Lashana Lynch. So I guess she doesn't die. Tired of actors placating like Pierce Brosnan saying Bond should be a woman in the next incarnation. Just make something new. Quit reversing genders to spice things up. But here's the thing. Why another remake? We don't need it. This film is awesome in its own merits. Hip-hop artists love it, and a lot of them at one point considered Tony Montana someone to emulate. Now, it's easy to see why this character is someone to emulate. I find myself falling under the character's spell. He just wants to be successful and have a family eventually. The people he kills, with the exception of his best friend Manny, either tried to kill him or were going to kill someone innocent. Kind of hard to defend him being a drug kingpin, but hey, it's a flaw in his character. His worldview as well. He's not wrong on a few points. Granted, I wouldn't seek to hang with Tony Montana, But to watch in fiction, I find myself laughing at a lot of portions of the film due to Pacino's great performance. It's just entertaining. By the way, I love Scarface. With all of these damn remakes of films that are perfection, it's just ridiculous to think of them remaking this one again. I mean, the editing style, the cinematography, the direction, the performances, the montage alone after Tony has killed Frank and ascends to the top, push it to the limit. Oh, I love that. I mean, I laughed my ass off when Tony takes the wedding party to look at the tiger in the backyard. Just how over the top this montage is showcases the excesses of the 80s and makes you love that period of time once again. There was nothing like the 1980s. No, there wasn't, and I loved living through it. And I was a teenager and a college student and a young adult in the 80s, and oh my God, did I have fun. I wish there was a law. No remakes until after 50 years. It's still plausible Universal will try to remake Scarface, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail and it doesn't happen. Or if they do, they take Miss Pfeiffer's advice. However, my friend that has been around execs and creative types on a level that not many of my friends have tells me that this is one industry he can think of where the people in charge hate their customers. Maybe they'll remake Scarface out of spite. It also makes sense why Star Trek Discovery keeps making boneheaded decisions like Spock smiling, trying to explain that, and Tribble's eating people. Those two examples alone back up my friend's statement. People behind that show definitely hate their customers. The moment Paramount tries to remake The Godfather, I'm retiring from the industry and finding something else. Any industry that would allow a sacrilege like this, it would be too depressing to continue working in. The industry would have lost its soul, and there is no redemption. We need to keep original films sacred because some of these sequels or remakes leave a smear on the perfection that has already been set. Scarface is a cautionary tale about excess and pride. The studios should take a look at it and reflect on their current slate of what they consider creative. Well, James, once again, a great letter. You and I certainly park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. Look, here's my feeling about remakes. And I've talked about this in terms of genre. I mean, I look at some of my favorite remakes. We got to see them in the late 70s. Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We got John Carpenter's The Thing, and we got David Cronenberg's The Fly. Three terrific filmmakers, three very different movies in terms of how they relate to the original. And I think if you're going to remake something, you should have a very different take on the material. And that way you can bring something new to it. Certainly, the original The Fly is not besmirched in any way, shape, or form by Cronenberg's remake. Cronenberg's remake is so different and covers such different ground that and such provocative ground. It's so, it's a movie it certainly can exist on its own, and the fact that it had a precursor, I don't think they harm one another, and they're so different that they should both be allowed to exist. Same with Carpenter's The Thing, and to a lesser extent, I mean, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where it was coming from the 50s, it was a little different. But what Kaufman did with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, you would think that, oh my God, I'll be honest with you. When I was a kid and I was, post Star Wars, I was very, very persnickety about my sci-fi. I would watch anything, but I'm like, now that sci-fi is highbrow with Star Wars and Close Encounters, I'm not going to watch. I didn't see Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, even though it was a remake. I'm like, you can't remake the original. I was kind of a pretentious douche when I was 11 or 12, and I didn't see it until it came out on home video. And I was kicking myself. I was so angry because it's such a beautifully shot film, and I eventually saw it in the theater. I went to a Landmark. I went to the Neptune in Seattle and saw it projected because it's an incredible film. But I agree with you. I mean, why remake perfection? Look, I understand. All you have to do is look at why RoboCop, Verhoeven, the remakes of Verhoeven's work, whether it's RoboCop, whether it's or Total Recall. You look at these things and you look at the remakes and you're like, well, why? Because what made them so successful in the first place is, look, you could take the RoboCop story and give it to a bunch of different people, but the reason it worked so well was it truly was about the screenplay and the sensibility of the director. And Paul Verhoeven brought such a unique, I mean, for whatever reason, Total Recall, the way it looks and the way it's designed and Schwarzenegger's performance, by any stretch of the imagination, it probably shouldn't work at all, but it does. It does. And the remake is so just bland. You're watching it and you're like, okay, it's handsomely made. Jose Padilla, who made the Elite Force movies, gets brought to America, which are great. If you haven't seen the Elite Four, Elite Squad, those films, they're Brazilian. I think they're Brazilian. You got to see them because they're great. But then when they bring him to America and he's given the RoboCop remake, it's missing that thing. It's missing that Verhoeven thing. It was too earnest. Both the Total Recall and the RoboCop remakes it's not that they're horrible movies. They're just missing. There's a collision of politics and you know what it is? It's a collision of politics and pulp. Paul Verhoeven has the perfect combination of politics and pulp. And even to a certain extent in Basic Instinct. On one hand, Basic Instinct rather than politics in terms of thriller. I love Basic Instinct. I love it for so many reasons, but I love the film. But nobody could have made it. If you remade Basic Instinct, somebody would do it. I mean, maybe David Fincher could remake Basic Instinct, but you know what? He didn't impress me with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The Swedish version is way better than Fincher's version. Is it better shot? No. But Fincher's version is missing a pulp aspect. It's too earnest. But you need that collision of pulp and politics or pulp and thriller, whatever, that Verhoeven does so well. It doesn't always work. I don't think Hollow Man really worked very well. But I mean, I've always kind of thought of RoboCop, Total Recall, and Basic Instinct as a trilogy. In a way, they have nothing to do with each other, but they're kind of this great trilogy, and that got a fourth movie. Starship Troopers is the Fury Road of that trilogy, and let's call it a quadrilogy. That's, to me, those four films, so good. And if you want to dip into it, if you haven't seen Verhoeven's The Fourth Man, you got to check that out. But James, I think you're right. Like, why remake these things? Look, risk averse. It's a brand name. It's a brand name that, well, it worked before. It's less risk for us. It's so funny because nobody ever has any of those remakes ever been huge hits of these modern films. When the studio is deciding what movie should be remade, as opposed to a filmmaker, if a filmmaker wants to write and direct something, a remake, then you're going to get something original. Even hell, Chuck Russell's remake of The Blob is pretty damn good. Very respectable remake as well. I don't know if you get that. You've got to find a filmmaker that's got a really interesting take. I really want to see the Soska sisters, their take on Rabbit. I haven't seen it yet. I've read some mixed things, but I'm curious. I mean, Rabbit is sort of my least favorite. I think it's of Cronenberg's early body horror features. They Came From Within, Rabbit, The Brood, Scanners, and Videodrome. I think it's probably the least of those movies. But I'm curious to see what the Soska sisters do with it. I haven't seen it yet. Dying to see it. But yeah, remakes are to me, unless you have a filmmaker. Look, Tony Scott was going to remake The Warriors, and it sounded, in modern day LA, it sounded like it was going to be pretty cool. I would love to have seen that. If you've got a different take, a new take, you need a new take, and you need a filmmaker. I think an auteur. You need an auteurist vision. But I think you're right. If you remake The Godfather, I'm hanging up my spurs. I'm out of here. That would be just horrific. But thanks for the letter, man. Thank you for the letter. Yeah. But remakes, oh, God. Let's see. Willow Yang says, why do you think we're more bothered by certain historical inaccuracies, a non-segregated army, than others, Nazis creating zombies? That's a really good question. Willow, one day when I go back up to Seattle, I'm gonna drive up to Vancouver, and you and I are gonna sit down and get toasted. Where I'm gonna see just how much you can drink, because we would spend hours contemplating these questions as we did shot after pint of beer. I don't even know what you drink. What do you drink? Do you drink? Anyway, why are we bothered by more historical inaccuracies, non-segregated army, than others? Well, I think because there is a certain reverence to certain historical events. I mean, at least the World War II, for instance. World War II, people take it very seriously, and because of in America, racial issues are a touchy subject. I guess they're touchy everywhere, but we in particular, um, because of our legacy. I mean, we kept slaves in this country for hundreds of years, whereas say in England they curtailed slavery, and we had slaves for a long, long time. So our legacy, especially with our black brethren here, America's never. You go back and you look. There's never been true equality in this country. So I think it gets touchy. That's why when we have movies that come out like Glory or Red Tails, movies that celebrate the black contribution to anything, whether it was the war effort or civil rights. I mean, we take that seriously. That's reverential. I mean, I am a huge fan of World War II horror stories, whether it's the B-17 bomber episode of Heavy Metal, Overlord, which we saw. One of my favorite horror novels. I talked about Graham Masterton, who wrote The Manitou. Graham Masterton wrote a World War II horror novel called The Devils of D-Day. And if memory serves, there is, if I remember correct, let me get this right. Elmeek, the demon of knives and sharp edges. The Devils of D-Day. I mean, man, when I saw that, it's got like a skull over a Nazi tank. I mean, come on. I don't know why, but I love Robert McCammon's book, The Wolf's Hour. Bring it on. I don't know. I mean, there's just something. And first of all, just Nazis, there's no better. I don't think the world, the Nazis might be the best villains, all-purpose villains of all time, because one, they're first of all, in real life, they were so evil, but they look cool. So evil that looks cool, you can never go wrong with. And and of course they were up to no good. So putting together the occult and Nazis is always good. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong with that. But I do think we don't want to step over certain things. So I think when you're talking about a non-segregated army, you want to be honorable to Black Americans that have been treated so shabbily in the past, and you don't want to necessarily either besmirch their memory or the memory of the people that actually did serve, and especially because Black soldiers were not treated very well by other Americans during World War II. I mean, not all Americans, but some, and we need to be mindful of those things. But Nazis creating zombies, of course they did. Nazis can do anything because they're evil and bad, and any reason that we can have to kill more Nazis in movies is fine by me. But maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. Anthony Gonzalez says, "Hey, Captain, what do you think about what we got with Alien 3 versus what it could have potentially been?" Okay, for those of you who don't know, my buddy Charlie de Lazarica, who is the Steven Spielberg of DVD special features, a true auteur as far as DVD special features go, he was able to create the box set, the 5-disc Blade Runner box set that is definitive, and he did Dangerous Days, the definitive Blade Runner documentary. He did all of the documentaries on the Alien anthology. And one of my favorite documentaries, one of my favorite making of documentaries, not just one of my favorite making of documentaries that he made, but is the documentary that covers the making of Alien 3, which many people know is David Fincher's first movie that he disowns. But it was a film that had a very tortured production history. Vincent Ward, a New Zealand director, was going to do Alien 3 was going to be set on a wooden planet populated by monks, which is where part of Alien 3 came from. I like it's not really a director's cut because he didn't participate, but the assembly of Alien 3 that's in the Alien anthology, the long version of Alien 3 It's a much better version of the movie. It's still deeply compromised. What a disaster that was. The writers didn't know what to do. The studio didn't know what to do. David Fincher was trying to hold the ship together. But I do like the vision of Alien 3 that we got. But Vincent Ward's Bananas version of Alien 3, I would love to have seen. And recently they collected, I think it's IDW, they collected William Gibson, the famous science fiction writer who wrote, of course, Neuromancer and Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive, which is still my favorite term for the female orgasm. I sent her into Mona Lisa Overdrive. I love that. He wrote a script for Alien 3 that they adapted into comics. But yeah, is Alien 3 a disaster? It is. I don't know if any version that we've ever seen of Alien 3, whether it was Vincent Ward's aborted version or the longer, quote unquote, I guess, I don't even know what it's called, the assembly version of Alien 3 that we got on the disc. We got the theatrical version and we have this assembly version. I think the assembly version is infinitely better than the theatrical version. I like Alien 3. I like its feel, its look, it's different, even though it betrays Aliens. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's interesting. I think everything could have been better. I think if they had an idea that worked, I think they should have embraced Vincent Ward's version and gone whole hog on that, simply because it was kind of bonkers, and I would like to have seen what it looked like. But again, I think the Alien franchise has the same problem that the Terminator franchise has. I mean, where do you go with it? And we've seen where Ridley Scott took it. I mean, to me, Alien is a perfect movie. The first Alien. And the whole point to me of the movie is that there are things in the cosmos, whether it's God or the devil, and I think that are unknowable, that we will never know. And the derelict alien spacecraft with the space jockey and all of those alien eggs, where were they going? Why are they there? Where did they come from? Was better left unanswered. Because in a way, not just Giger's amazing biomechanical production design and all of that amazing artwork, and the sort of what was so great about the Alien was it wasn't just an alien like an alien outer space alien. I think it was the closest thing we got to really seeing a depiction of what H.P. Lovecraft was going for when he created the old gods and the Cthulhu mythos. The alien was from somewhere else. The way the design of that work, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the space jockey and the alien derelict and the xenomorphs themselves came from another dimension. They came from Lovecraft's dimension. They came from the Cthulhu, wherever the Cthulhu's or wherever the old gods came from. That's where it came from. It's just unknowable. And by what happened in Prometheus, I mean, I like the idea of the engineers. It just devolved into gobbledygook, and it completely demystified what was going on. But if you didn't know, I think Alien is a perfect movie, and the tone of it is so great. And I love Aliens as well, which is more of a war film, but it doesn't diminish the idea of the xenomorphs, and in a way, obviously, with the Alien Queen. But I just think that, again, the Alien franchise has been done. It's been done dirty. And it's too bad, because the vision of Alien still stands up as, I think, one of the greatest sci-fi horror visions, if not the single greatest sci-fi horror vision that is still otherworldly, the same way that Hellraiser is otherworldly. It's just the monumental achievement of Alien. I don't know if it will ever be surpassed. I don't know. I hope that answers your question. TDM says, man, those are some classics I haven't thought about in years. Didn't know how connected some of them were. Carpenter was a bad man. Or as it was sung in the beginning of Christine, bad to the bone. I love that song. Broke 1,000 hearts before I met you. I'll break 1,000 more, baby, before I'm through. Want to be yours, pretty baby, yours and yours alone. I don't know. I shouldn't really sing, should I? Anyway, John Suntress is here from the Word Balloon podcast. He says, thanks for the Joker short trek talk, dude. For those of you who don't know, I recently appeared on John Suntress's Word Balloon podcast last week. We had a rollicking 2.5-hour conversation I had not seen the new short trek, The Trouble with Discovery. Wasn't it called that? And John was warning me. He's like, have you seen this yet? And I was like, no, dude, I haven't seen it. Oh my God, what a train wreck. Ugh. Anyway, David Cabrera says, R&B, have you seen Lake Mungo? Chris Stuckman reviewed it and loves it, but I can't find it anywhere. He said it's one of the scariest movies he's ever seen. I'm looking for a good scare. Well, David, first of all, thank you for writing in. For those of you, if you don't know Chris Stuckman, I don't know him personally, but I love him as a movie reviewer. I love Chris Stuckman. I mean, I don't love him like, in that kind of a way. Although he's a handsome dude, I will freely admit to that. I really enjoy his reviews. And he recently reviewed Lake Mungo, which is a movie I had never heard of. And it was one of the dark sky, like every year for a while they did it, 8 films to die for. And it was part of that series of films one year. And I had never heard of Lake Mungo. And he was just waxing rhapsodic about it, but he did say that it was on Amazon Prime. So I don't know. I got to go check that out. But yes, David, ever since I watched it like 3 or 4 days ago, and I've had Lake Mungo on the brain because even from his review, I didn't get a sense. It was like some found footage from. I didn't get a sense of what the movie was about. So of all the things I've heard about this Halloween season, yes, I want to see Lake Mungo. Thanks for bringing that up. But he did say it was streaming. So, or maybe it's not streaming. I don't know. I would really like to see Lake Mungo. And again, I like Chris Stuckman. If you haven't watched Chris Stuckman, I mean, he's a big YouTuber. He's been around for a long time. I would strongly suggest checking him out because he's dope. I love the guy. Now here's somebody who's written in before. Now I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his name correctly. Mazif Jada or Mazif Yada. What a cool, again, I've said I love this name. Mazif Jada, I think. I don't know. This is a great letter. It's very short and sweet, but I love it. Clockwork Orange had a profound impact on me. I heard it had that for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Also, what do you say to people who are off-put by the ultra violence? I have often said that until I saw The Godfather, A Clockwork Orange was my favorite movie of all time. When I saw The Godfather, it became my second favorite movie of all time. And I once read that Stanley Kubrick said that The Godfather was a perfect movie. It was his favorite movie, I think. And I didn't know that at the time. I love A Clockwork Orange. I love everything about A Clockwork Orange. I think A Clockwork Orange shows there's so many things going on. Of course, it's a literary adaptation of Anthony Burgess's novel of the same name. I think it's better than the novel. I love the performances. I love the stylization. It's a highly stylized film. I love Kubrick's direction of it. He made it right after he made 2001. Obviously, what a change of pace. And again, the message of the movie, of course, for those of you who've never seen Clockwork Orange, in a nutshell, it is about a gang of thugs, droogs, 4 guys, Alex, the leader, Pete, Georgie, and Dim. And they're a teenage gang. And it's in a near future crumbling Britain. And these 4 guys run around and raise hell. They invade homes, they rape women, they get in fights, they steal stuff. Alec eventually murders somebody. They're bad guys. And yet Alex is a character that loves his carnal pleasures. He loves the ladies. He loves classical music, specifically Beethoven. And he leads a dual life. And one day, through the machinations of the plot, he is captured and sent to prison. And he ends up participating in a politically motivated program to reform criminality by using the Ludovico technique, which is a medical technique that uses drugs and imagery to shape behavior. And that's all I'm going to say. And he sort of becomes a political pawn. And it's an incredible film. But what I loved most about it, what I loved most about the film is at the end of the day, the movie really has something to say that I think is quite profound. And in my mind, the profundity of the film is about the fact that free will, our um, our ability to choose what we want to do as human beings, to have free will, is more important than even the desire to stop criminal behavior. The fact that it is more important to be able to, the movie basically says that it's more important to be able to choose, to have free will, even if it is to choose to do evil, to choose to do bad, than it is to have free will and basically our essence stripped away from us. And I think that's an important film, an important idea. And I dearly, dearly love the movie. I love the movie so much, and I can't say enough about it. And the filmmaking is impeccable. The stylization is impeccable. What's really interesting is the movie has great verisimilitude, even though it is completely stylized and there's a lot of unreality into it. But there is verisimilitude into its own universe, and it is a masterclass in filmmaking, and everything that Stanley Kubrick is all about is on full effect, on full display in the movie. I love it. I love it so much. And although I find it disconcerting now that apparently the Kubrick estate has allowed people to make toys of Alex. I mean, they make toys of Alex, but not of the rest of his gang. I need Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Willow Yang says, I don't drink alcohol. I don't like the taste. I'm sure there's something we could find that you would like. I'm sure. That would be kind of fun too, wouldn't it? Let's see what alcohol Willow Yang would like. That's like a gauntlet that's been thrown down. I think now everybody in the chat should suggest, for someone who doesn't like Willow Yang, doesn't like alcohol, okay, everybody, why don't you suggest what Willow should try? If you don't like alcohol, start with perhaps wine coolers. When I was in college, my first year of college, my dad insured a liquor distribution company. And for whatever reason, my dad thought that his way of being a cool dad was he would bring me cases of Bartles and James wine coolers. Now, I would go off to college at 18. My dad was a great guy. And I would literally, he would give me 4 cases of Bartles and James wine coolers every couple weeks. And I had this one guy when I was living on the 8th floor of A dorm at the Evergreen State College. I had this one dude that would just knock on my door, and he thought he was being cool, and I'd open the door and he'd be standing there and he'd go, Bartle me. I'm like, okay. And I'd give him a wine cooler. But you should try that. Start with wine coolers. I mean, there's drinks to try. There's ways to do it. Because come on, Willow. I have a feeling that you might like alcohol at some point. Just Plain Steve says, I am doing a creature feature on my Instagram page this month at Vundi, Vundi. Today is the Man Thing. Got me wondering what some of your favorite creature feature type movies are. The Blob, Universal Monsters. Well, I got to go with my man Dave Scow. In terms of creature features, I love Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is a later 50s Universal monster. I love the Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's dope. I love the design. I think it's great, but I love the original Frankenstein. As a matter of fact, I love the original Frankenstein. Actually, I love the original Frankenstein, Wolfman, and Dracula. Bride of Frankenstein's a great movie, but it's a little campy. But yeah, and in terms of creature feature type movies, I mean, I got to go with, I do like the original Blob, but I like Them. We talked about that before, giant ants. Yeah, those are some, old school black and white creature features. Okay. I'll tell you, it's not really a creature feature, but it's a movie that I love, and it's based on a Fritz Lieber story that's been remade a couple times called Conjure Wife. It is a delightful movie. It's a British movie called Burn, Witch, Burn. And it's basically about Peter Wyngarde, who played Clytus in Flash Gordon. An obscure body in the SK system, Your Majesty. The inhabitants refer to it as the planet Earth. That Peter Wyngarde. Peter Wyngarde in Burn, Witch, Burn basically plays a professor, a science professor. I don't know if it's physics or biology. It's some stuffy British college. And he doesn't, the idea of magic and all that's just hogwash to him. He doesn't believe in it at all. And it turns out that his wife is a witch, and he's, unbeknownst to him, he's come under attack by Tallulah and dark forces. He's come under attack by dark forces at this college that want to discredit him. Hey, Tallulah, you want a cookie? I knew you did. Look at that. She wants a cookie. I know. Okay. Have a cookie. Want a cookie? You want to come up here? You're so good. You sit down, but Gilbert knows how to come up. You want to come up? You going to come up? There he comes. Yeah, buddy. You don't want a cookie? Oh, she's distracted. No cookie for Gilbert. That's the second cookie for Tallulah. There you go. Interesting how Gilbert didn't want a cookie. I can't help it. So yeah, Burn, Witch, Burn. If you want to watch a great, delightfully fun film. I don't know why I thought of that as being a creature feature. It's really not a creature feature. What, you didn't want a cookie? Now Gilbert comes back and wants a cookie? What, you couldn't be bothered? See, Tallulah just sits down. I guess not. Okay, you get another cookie then, Tallulah. You get a cookie. Gilbert, you want a cookie? There you go. Gilbert took one. Oh, he dropped on the floor. If he doesn't want it, I can't force a cookie down his gullet. Anyway, yeah, so those are creature features that I like. It's a terrible movie. And I don't know why I like this. It's one of these movies. I'll get a creature feature. By the way, I think it comes out on Blu-ray next week. The TV movie that I've talked about before, that Guillermo del Toro did a remake of, but it's not nearly as good. I know if I'm going to go back and watch it now. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, with shrunken head creatures that come out of a chimney. It comes out on Blu-ray next week. Very excited. Warner Archive is putting it out. So there you go. Yeah, but gosh, what else? I think I don't know about. I think that's all the letters. All of today's letters, people. All of today's letters. Which is probably a good thing. It's Friday. Jet Screamer says Sleepaway Camp is available here on YouTube. I like Sleepaway Camp. I mean, Just Plain Steve, Man Thing. I love Man Thing. I love the comics, but I was never like I didn't like slasher movies that much because there was nothing else to them. I mean, after I watched Halloween and The Burning with Cropsey, and I mean, all of, whether it was Terror Train or Prom Night or it was just Sleepaway Camp, I just got tired of a masked killer. I like My Bloody Valentine. I remember thinking My Bloody Valentine was pretty good, but slasher movies, they don't mean anything. There was no bigger. I like serial killer movies because there's like a philosophy. There's usually serial killers, whether it's James Gumb who wants to transform himself, or whether it's John Doe from Seven who wants to commit a philosophical crime that people will puzzle over forever. That's the kind of thing I like. I love me some serial killers. And I guess slashers are serial killers, but they don't want anything. I mean, I wish Jason Voorhees had something he wanted other than just to vanquish teenagers that done him wrong. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to be the end of Robservations number 252. I should say that Tango Shalom is coming along quite nicely. Very excited about that. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the Honorable Mr. Michael Bodden, who is fighting the political fight of his life to see if he'll be reelected as mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. Who's to know? I will be back tomorrow with episode number 253. And maybe I'll finally do that list of horror movies, but this was great. I haven't done my Halloween horror episode yet, but I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Please go to the Burnettwork.net website. You can interact there. I know we're behind, but we're going to get caught up and all of that. And I want to thank you, Imagination Connoisseurs, for just being you. And with that, I'm going to bring this chat number 252 brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And remember, please hit like or subscribe if you want to, and tell your friends. And with that, I will say every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And I will now say, as always, have a better day.